Right, today we're talking about the 20 poverty meals our grandparents survived on that we'd absolutely never touch today. Now, most people think poverty food back then was just smaller portions of normal meals. But here's the uncomfortable truth: what they ate would horrify us now. Things we'd throw in the bin, they put on the table. I've spoken to dozens of people who lived through this. I've researched the reality of wartime and post-war Britain, and I'm going to show you exactly what real poverty looked like on a plate. Brace yourself, love. Let's start with number 1, bread soaked in hot tea. And no, that's not a dunked biscuit. This was stale bread torn into pieces, put in a bowl, and covered with hot weak tea instead of milk. Here's how desperate this was. You'd have bread that was too hard to chew, maybe 3 or 4 days old, so you'd tear it into chunks, pour over whatever tea you could make from leaves that had already been used twice. Add a tiny spoonful of sugar if you were lucky, and eat it with a spoon like porridge. That was breakfast for thousands of kids. Why does this matter? Because this shows the difference between being poor and being destitute. When you can't afford milk, when the bread's gone stale, when even porridge oats are out of reach, this is what you do. You make do with literally nothing. That's just the beginning, and number 2 gets worse. Number 2, sugar sandwiches, but not the bread and sugar I mentioned before. This was different. This was when the bread was stale. There was no butter, just water sprinkled on the bread to make the sugar stick. You'd take 2 slices of stale bread, sprinkle them with a bit of water from the tap, scatter sugar over the damp bread so it wouldn't fall off, press them together, and that was your sandwich. The water made the bread slightly less hard to chew. That was the reasoning. This was important because it reveals how sugar became a substitute for nutrition. Sweet meant energy. Sweet meant you could keep going a bit longer. Sweet stopped the hunger pangs for an hour. It wasn't about taste. It was about survival. But at least that had sugar. Number 3 had even less. Number 3 is flour and water dumplings. And I mean just flour and water. No egg, no milk, no fat. Just those 2 ingredients mixed into a paste, formed into balls and boiled in salted water. Let me tell you how grim this was. You'd mix plain flour with just enough water to make a stiff dough. Roll it into marble-sized balls with wet hands so it didn't stick. Drop them into a pot of boiling salted water and cook them until they floated. Then you'd fish them out and eat them, chewy, tasteless, stodgy lumps that filled your stomach and nothing more. Why did people eat this? Because a bag of flour went a long way, and it was cheaper than potatoes when times were really desperate. These dumplings had no nutritional value beyond carbohydrates, but they stopped the hollow feeling in your belly. And speaking of hollow feelings, wait until you hear number 4. Number 4, bone broth, made from bones that had already been used by someone else. Yes, you read that right. Butchers would sell used bones for a penny after they'd already been boiled once by another family. Here's how it worked. A better-off family would buy bones to make soup or stock, use them once, then sell them back to the butcher for a halfpenny. The butcher would sell them again to poor families for a penny. You'd take those bones home, boil them for hours and hours to extract whatever nutrients were left, add water, salt, maybe an onion if you could afford it, and that thin, weak liquid was your soup. This matters because it shows the actual hierarchy of poverty. There were the poor, and then there were the desperately poor who ate the leftovers of the poor. That's not something we like to think about, but it was real. That's recycled food. But number 5 is even more shocking. Number 5, dripping toast when there was no dripping left. So what did they do? They'd rub the toast on the dripping bowl to pick up whatever residue was stuck to the sides. Picture this, the dripping's all gone, scraped clean days ago. but there's a thin film of fat residue coating the inside of the bowl where it's hardened. You'd take your piece of toast and rub it around the inside of that bowl, picking up those thin streaks of old fat, getting just enough flavour to pretend it was the real thing. Why is this significant? Because it demonstrates how far you'd go to create the memory of a proper meal. It wasn't about nutrition at this point, it was about maintaining dignity, about telling yourself you were still eating dripping on toast like normal people. But we're just getting started. Number 6 will make you uncomfortable. Number 6 is potato peel soup, and this isn't some trendy zero-waste recipe. This was soup made from the peelings other people threw away. You'd collect every potato peeling from the week's cooking, even fish them out of the scrap bucket, wash them thoroughly to get the dirt off, boil them in water with an onion if you had one and plenty of salt, and cook them until the peelings were soft. The thin, slightly bitter liquid and those mushy peelings, that was your meal. This worked because potato peelings do contain some nutrients, especially if they're thick peelings. But it tasted earthy and bitter and wrong. Kids would cry rather than eat it. Parents would eat it so their children could have the actual potatoes. And while we're on scraps, number 7 is equally grim. Number 7, cabbage water soup. Not soup with cabbage in it. The water left over from boiling cabbage, reheated and served as soup. After you'd boiled cabbage for Sunday dinner, you'd save that cooking water, which by now was greenish-grey and smelled of sulphur, keep it in the pantry, and the next day you'd reheat it, add some salt and maybe stale bread torn up to bulk it out, and serve that as soup. The nutritional value? Minimal. The taste? Horrible. But here's why it mattered. That cooking water did contain some vitamins that had leached out of the cabbage. Not many, but in a diet where scurvy was a real concern, every bit counted. They weren't stupid, they were desperate and clever. Speaking of desperation, number 8 takes it further. Number 8 is bread pudding, but not the nice kind. This was made from every scrap of stale bread collected over a week, sometimes months, soaked in water until it went to mush. You'd keep a bowl where all bread scraps went, the crusts kids wouldn't eat, the bits that fell on the floor, the ends nobody wanted. When you had enough, you'd soak them in water overnight until they turned into a soggy paste, squeeze out the excess water, mix in a tiny bit of sugar and dried fruit if you had any, maybe some spice, bake it until it held together and cut it into squares. This was important as a psychological survival tool. It was one of the few times poverty food was transformed into something that resembled a treat. It made children feel like they were having pudding, even though it was made from rubbish. But at least that was sweet. Number 9 wasn't. Number 9, lard sandwiches. Just bread with lard spread on it like butter. Pure white fat on bread, sometimes with salt sprinkled on top. You'd take your bread, spread it with lard straight from the tin, that white waxy fat that sets solid at room temperature. Maybe add a bit of salt to give it some flavour and eat it. The lard would coat your mouth, stick to your teeth, leave a greasy film that wouldn't go away. Why lard? Because it was the cheapest fat you could buy. Cheaper than butter, cheaper than margarine, and it was pure calories, which meant energy. For people doing hard manual labour with not enough food, those calories were the difference between working and collapsing. And if lard sounds bad, wait for number 10. Number 10, tripe and onions. Now tripe is cow's stomach lining, and it was eaten because it was the cheapest meat available. Butchers practically gave it away. You'd buy this pale, rubbery stomach lining, wash it thoroughly, cut it into strips, boil it for hours until it was tender, and I mean hours, 2 or 3 at least, then cook it with onions in milk or water to make a kind of stew. The texture was slippery and squeaky, the taste was mild, but the smell while cooking was absolutely rank. This matters because organ meats and offcuts were the protein source for poor families. The rich ate steak, the middle class ate chops, the poor ate the bits nobody else wanted: stomach, liver, kidneys, trotters, tongue. It kept them alive, but my God, it was grim. Let's move to number 11, equally challenging. Number 11 is pig's trotters, pig's feet, boiled or stewed until the meat fell off the tiny bones. More bone and gristle than actual meat. You'd buy trotters for pennies, boil them in salted water for 3 or 4 hours until what little meat there was went soft, then sit there picking off tiny bits of meat from between all those small bones. There wasn't much eating in them. Mostly you were sucking the gelatine and gristle. Why eat trotters? Because they were cheap, and they added gelatine to stews, which made thin soup seem thicker and more satisfying. But eating them was a performance, lots of effort for very little reward. Number 12 might be the worst yet. Number 12, sheep's head broth. An actual sheep's head split in half, boiled to make broth. And yes, people ate the meat from the head, including the eyes and tongue. The butcher would sell sheep's heads for almost nothing. You'd take it home, wash it thoroughly, split it in half with a cleaver, put it in your biggest pot with water, vegetables if you had them, and boil it for hours. The broth was rich, but the sight of that head in the pot, teeth and all, was nightmare fuel. But people ate it because it was cheap protein, and the broth was genuinely nutritious. The tongue was considered the best bit. The eyes, well, some ate them, some didn't. It was survival, not pleasure. Let's move to something slightly less confronting, number 13. Number 13 is bread and vinegar. Just bread torn into pieces and sprinkled with vinegar to give it some flavour when there was nothing else to put on it. You'd tear your bread, usually stale, into a bowl, sprinkle it with malt vinegar, maybe add a pinch of salt, and eat it. The vinegar soaked into the bread and gave it a sharp, sour taste that at least made it interesting instead of just bland and dry. This worked because vinegar was cheap as chips, and it made you salivate, which helped you swallow the dry bread. It was a flavour, any flavour, when you had none. That mattered more than you'd think. Now here's one that might surprise you, number 14. Number 14, mock duck, which was actually stuffed liver shaped to look like it might be poultry. It wasn't. It was the cheapest liver available, flattened and stuffed with breadcrumbs. You'd get lamb or pig liver, slice it thin, beat it flat, make a stuffing from stale breadcrumbs mixed with onion and herbs if you had them. Roll the liver around the stuffing, tie it with string, and roast it. From a distance, if you squinted, it vaguely resembled a small bird, hence mock duck. Why the pretense? Because poverty meals often tried to mimic something better. It maintained morale. It let families pretend, just for a meal, that they were eating something special. The psychology of survival isn't just about calories. Speaking of pretending, number 15 continues this theme. Number 15 is mock goose, similar to mock duck, but using even less meat. This was mostly potato with a tiny bit of liver to give it flavour. You'd take one piece of liver, because that's all you could afford, chop it very fine, mix it with mashed potato, stuff it into an onion if you were being fancy, or just shape it into a mound, stick some sage leaves on top, and roast it. The potato bulk made one piece of liver feed 4 people. This mattered because it was a Christmas meal for poor families. While others had goose or turkey, they had mock goose. Same shape on the table, same ceremonial serving. But the reality underneath was potatoes with a memory of meat. Let's talk about number 16, back to basics. Number 16 is suet pudding with absolutely nothing inside it. Just suet, hard animal fat, mixed with flour and water, steamed and served. You'd mix shredded sweet with flour and a pinch of salt, add just enough water to bind it, form it into a roll, wrap it in a cloth, and steam it for 2 hours. What you got was a heavy, dense, greasy log of stodge that sat in your stomach like a brick. But here's why it was eaten. Sweat was cheap fat, and it was pure calories. For coal miners, factory workers, people doing brutal physical labour in the cold, this gave them the energy to work. It wasn't pleasant, but it was fuel. Number 17 is equally stodgy. Number 17, pobs. This was bread broken into pieces, covered with hot milk or water, and eaten as a kind of mush. It was food for the sick, the old, and the very poor. You'd break stale bread into a bowl, pour over hot milk if you had it, or just hot water if you didn't. Add a spoonful of sugar, and eat it while it was still warm and mushy. It had the consistency of wallpaper paste. This mattered because it was gentle on sick stomachs, and it was soft enough for people with no teeth to eat. In a time before dentures were common and when dental care was non-existent for the poor, having food you could eat without chewing was essential. We're nearly done. Number 18. Number 18 is toad in the hole with no toads, the batter without any sausages. Just Yorkshire pudding batter poured into a tin and baked. You'd make your batter from flour, eggs if you had them, or just flour and water if you didn't. Pour it into a greased tin, bake it until it puffed up and went golden, then serve it with gravy. It was the form of toad in the hole without the substance. Why bother? Because it looked like a proper meal on the table. It puffed up impressively, it filled your plate, it soaked up gravy, and it made you feel like you were having a roast dinner even when there was no meat involved. Appearance mattered. Number 19 is particularly sad. Number 19, water soup. And yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. Salted water with a fried piece of bread floating in it. You'd boil water, add salt and maybe pepper if you had it. Fry a piece of bread in whatever fat you could scrape together until it was crispy, float it in the water, and call it soup. That was dinner when there was genuinely nothing else. This is the bottom, love. This is what happens when you've run out of everything. When the cupboard is bare, when there's no money until Friday, when you've borrowed from every neighbour who'd lend. You make water soup and you're grateful for the fried bread. And finally, number 20. Number 20, chitterlings. These are pig intestines, cleaned and either boiled or fried. The smell alone would clear a room. You'd buy the intestines, spend hours cleaning them inside and out, and I mean hours of scrubbing, then either boil them until tender or slice and fry them. They had a rubbery texture and a distinct taste that you either stomached or you went hungry. This was the ultimate poverty food, because only the desperately poor ate intestines. Even other organ meats ranked higher, but they were protein, they were cheap, and when you're choosing between chitterlings and hunger, you eat the chitterlings. So there you have it. 20 meals that show what real poverty looked like on British tables. Not romanticised, not nostalgic, just hard, grim survival. We've covered things from bones that had been used twice to water soup, and it should make us grateful for what we have now. If you found this eye-opening, leave a comment below, and remember, they survived this so we wouldn't have to.